Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here, talking SEC baseball. Like every weekend in the SEC is interesting. This one, no exception. And we're going to maybe talk a little bit about what happened this weekend, but more than that, talk about where things are headed. Because this is the time of the year where everybody's talking about seeding for the NCAA tournament and who's hosting and who's in and who's out and those things. And so let's start at the top with Tennessee, which lost a game to Auburn, won the Friday game and the Sunday game, is now 19-2 in the league, 40-4 overall. Fastest team since 2000 South Carolina to get to 40 wins. I believe that Carolina team had the same record. Let's just keep it really simple with the Vols. Other than maybe going 0-9 the rest of the way in the SEC, which is not going to happen, and even then, Tennessee might still host. Tennessee's kind of that point where, like, what do you have to do to blow what you've accumulated? So the Vols have series remaining with Kentucky at Mississippi State and Georgia at home, and just win a couple of those games, and I think Tennessee is not only hosting but a national seed.
Yeah, I think anyone who's paid attention this year knows probably that's been wrapped up for a little bit now. And yeah, I mean, like you said, Kentucky, Georgia, Mississippi State left. I don't really see any pitfalls in there. So even if they lost the series, I don't think it would matter at this point. They're 40-4, and yeah, have done pretty much all the work they need to be right there. And yeah, that's why they are where they are. And so again, they'll probably win every series they play the rest of the way, and they'll be just fine locking up that top seed. So
the consensus number 2 in the SEC right now is Arkansas, although that's an interesting team because Arkansas has somehow only got the number 85 strength of schedule overall, which is why Arkansas is 26 in the RPI. I have seen some years where the RPI goes almost straight down the RPI, or the NCAA does when it comes to hosting, Blake. I mean, I've literally seen one year a few years ago where it took the top 16 RPI teams and said those are your hosts. Now, I think Arkansas's RPI is going to improve even if it plays 500 or a little under because it's got a road trip to Auburn. It's got a home series with Vanderbilt. Auburn is 3 in the RPI. Vandy is 9. And then a road trip to Alabama, which just by virtue of taking a road trip against the number 53 team, you win 2 or 3 there, you're probably in decent shape, and you maybe even move up a little bit. But that one's going to be interesting because Arkansas is 14-7 in the league, and I think is a really good team. But the RPI is what matters, and Arkansas really traditionally not in hosting territory yet. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but that one's maybe more interesting than you'd think looking at the 34-10 record, the 14-7 mark in the SEC, and knowing that it's Arkansas. There might be a little more work to do than you would just think if you just take a first glance and you don't know the RPI.
yeah, and I mean, like you said, interesting schedule left with Auburn, Vanderbilt, and even at Alabama. I guess could be a little tricky depending on what you get with Alabama, but yeah, so that is an interesting one. Like you said, if you're probably looking up thinking, all right, they're clearly the number 2 team, but it's 26 right now RPI wise, and yeah, so I mean it makes the next 2 series, I think especially against Auburn and Vanderbilt, pretty important, and they'll get one of those at home with Vandy. But yeah, I mean that was that was an interesting series, I guess, this past weekend too against Ole Miss, where they lose the first one, and certainly interesting the rest of the way, but. Yeah, so Arkansas, I mean, it's like we always say with everyone at this point, or for a lot of teams, some teams it doesn't matter, but the next series is the the biggest series now at this point, where you're just trying to kind of build up that positive momentum heading towards that. So
The thing with Arkansas is I think we thought this would be one of the better hitting teams in the country, and not that they've been bad by any stretch, but we mentioned the strength of schedule's not been great. The runs just have not been coming like we thought. Robert Moore's not really hit for them. You've had some other guys that have been maybe good instead of great. They're just an interesting team for a lot of reasons.
yeah, I mean it's it's still, I think at their best. I mean, like you said, we've seen what they're capable of at their best, and I still think that's something you're gonna have in the back of your mind as you move forward with them and kind of see what's possible. And but I just man, there's so many good teams like we know in this league, and it's just kind of been we say it every year, but it's a gauntlet, even if you're the top team or not. And we know Tennessee's been kind of a different case this year, but yeah, it's always going to be a grind, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they finish with these last 9 games in league play. So
A couple teams, there's really three teams right there after those two. In fact, you could argue from an RPI standpoint in better shape than Arkansas. Auburn at 3 in the RPI, Georgia at 4, A&M at 12. Let's start with Auburn. Auburn actually went up in the RPI this weekend despite losing 2 of 3. Auburn has got a huge series this weekend hosting Arkansas. It then hosts Alabama and goes to Kentucky to end the season. So Auburn right now at, let's see, 31-14 overall, 12-9 in the SEC. Auburn would be hosting if the season ends today. I think the thing you don't want to do if you're Auburn is get swept somewhere. I think if Auburn gets to 16, that's a hosting resume. So just go 4-5 the rest of the way. Texas A&M, I saw the Aggies this weekend. That's a really good team. We had some questions about A&M in the non-conference portion where it was less than stellar, but this is a team with a lot of transfers and some new arms and really a lot of new bats too that just big and physical and impressive. It can really hit up and down the lineup. Some of the pieces of the pitching have come together. A&M would be hosting today, 27-15 overall and 12-9 in the SEC. Series coming up with South Carolina and State at home, and then Ole Miss. So really, A&M, I guess what you look at is you say those are three of the worst teams in the conference. A&M really needs to play above 500 ball, or else that RPI starts taking on a little bit of water. But I think A&M in a really good place to host right now, and I would bet that that's where A&M winds up.
yeah, like you said, with the schedule left with those 3 teams, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and I mean I think probably aside from Tennessee, I'd put A&M up against anybody right now, just the way they've played probably. You said, I mean, they're coming off a series win against Vanderbilt. They had just got the series win against Arkansas, and Georgia before that, and it's just kind of they're playing their best right now, and obviously that's where you want to be. And again, you've pretty much put your work in at this point against the top teams that you've played, and now it's just a matter of beating the teams you probably should beat, and if you can do that, yeah, I think they'll be sitting pretty because they've picked the right time to play as well as they have been here over the past several weeks. So
Georgia team, which I've said for a while, fascinating because it's 4 in the RPI, number 9 strength of schedule. The Bulldogs, though, have been outscored in the SEC by a pretty good margin. It's over 20 runs. I don't know what it is after this weekend. We've talked about the thing where Cannon pitches really well and the rest of the staff kind of collapses. The rest of the staff was better this weekend. That's good. Georgia with a huge series coming up against Vanderbilt. Then it travels to Knoxville before it ends with Missouri. Georgia's RPI is to the point where I think Georgia needs to play above 500 ball from here on down to host.
yeah, like you said, in the top 5 RPI, you've got two big series left against Vandy and at Tennessee. Obviously, you're not going to expect them to win that series. If you get a game, great. But the Vandy one is, I mean, that's important because, like you said, it's you think they're still in a fine enough spot. But if you win the series against Vanderbilt and you take some positive momentum going into that Tennessee one, and like I said, maybe get a game there, and as long as you're not positioned to get swept by Missouri or anything at the end, which I don't think is going to happen. Yeah, I think Georgia's another one that when you look up and down the line, we just talked about kind of A&M the way they've been playing, and I think Georgia's at least done enough to this point, even though they've kind of been up and down a little bit at times. But look, the RPI is at 4, and yeah, I think they're fine because again, they're still going to play Vanderbilt, they're still going to play Tennessee, and that's not going to hurt them much. So.
We come to LSU and Vandy. LSU is 17 in the RPI, Vandy 9. Strength of schedule 14 and 12 respectively. LSU's got series with Alabama on the road, Ole Miss at home, and then at Vandy. And Vandy's other two series are at Georgia, at Arkansas. This is that territory of like how many hosts will the SEC get? This is where it really gets interesting because I think the SEC's gotten 6 before. I don't know if it's gotten 7. But you got really 6 teams right here that are right there for RPI purposes. Now, Vandy just, for whatever reason, cannot seem to get above 500 in the league. Blue chances to do that against Florida and Kentucky with one-run losses. The last 2 weekends coming into this and then losing to A&M at home in lopsided fashion in Game 3. You know, I'll put it this way for Vanderbilt. If Vanderbilt goes, 6-3 the rest of the way, I think it hosts because then it's 16-14. It's maybe going to have the number 1 RPI in the country or certainly top 5. LSU, Alabama, Ole Miss are not going to boost the RPI significantly, but I think it's about getting to 16 wins. And now LSU only has to get 4 in its last 9. I think LSU is getting really close to being able to host. Vanderbilt's really going to have to play its best ball to get there.
Yeah, I mean they've been a hard one to figure out, like you said. I think it's just I don't know what to expect from them the rest of the way because like we had talked about not long ago. I mean, you look at the remaining schedules. I think there's no doubt that compared to most, their schedule is just brutal the rest of the way. But the RPI is still in the top 10. You mentioned they still got Georgia, Arkansas, LSU, still got that game against Louisville. Man, it's just I couldn't even give you a great prediction on what I would think their record would be the rest of the way, just because I think there's such a wide range of what that could look like based on the teams that they're playing. So they're probably the one that I have the least grasp on in terms of where this thing could be, May 21st after that last game against LSU. I just think that there is such a wide range of possibilities based on the teams they play and just based on how they've been playing as a team. So
then we get to Florida, which is 8-13 in the SEC as we sit here on Monday morning. At Mississippi State, at Missouri. So that's 2 of the easier teams in the league. And then South Carolina at home, where Carolina does not play well on the road. Now, Florida's issue is just for a few years it's not played well away from home. But I think number 1 overall strength of schedule, I think you get to 13 if you're Florida. You got a better than average chance of making it to the NCAAs. May depend on what happens in Hoover, but that strength of schedule is going to be really compelling for the committee. Florida can get to 14. If it can go 6-3, I think that's question answered. It's when it's 13 wins or below where it gets really dicey for the Gators.
Yeah, we had talked about that long stretch for them, that pretty much finally let up, I guess, against Kentucky. And, we just said, I mean, you looked at kind of what they had played basically since, mid-March, and it was just weekend after weekend after weekend, and you knew kind of what you're going up against. And we know how the schedule can fall sometimes for some teams. That just happened to be one of those for them. But now as we talked about probably last week, the rest of the way, there's at least room for picking up wins, and that's Mississippi State, Missouri, South Carolina, those kind of games in there. So they're another one that I think it's you would expect them probably to be in decent enough shape with those 3 series that they probably win 2 of those. But you never know. I mean, we always say when you go on the road, you never know, and 2 of those 3 are on the road. So yeah, man, it's so hard to predict how. I mean, we always say it's like it's baseball, but especially in this league with some of these teams like this, it's hard to predict how it's going to unfold. Even though you're like, all right, on paper, they should win at Missouri, they should be fine. But I don't know. Like, there's you never know. I think with kind of the way some of these teams have played, and just knowing that it's always a challenge no matter who you're playing. So.
The team that can't seem to make up any ground, even when it seems like it has, is Mississippi State. State goes to Missouri this weekend, loses 2 of 3. Missouri 45 in the RPI. State dropped, I want to say, a dozen spots in the RPI by losing 2 of 3, which I would not have expected. 88 as of this morning. State is at 9-12 I believe. Let me double check that. That is correct. Remaining series, Florida and Tennessee in Starkville with A&M on the road in between. This is one of those things where I want to say if State can go 5-4 the rest of the way, that's 14-16. That's usually good enough in this league. But that RPI doesn't seem to ever budge forward. Now, it would, I think, with winning those games. But it's like, is it enough? Because I think if State's outside the top 60 in the RPI, that just becomes a really tough sell to the committee, I think. I think the out-of-conference work is really where State hurt itself.
Yeah, like you said, you see that big 8-8 there, and you're just thinking, that's not a great place to be with, like you mentioned, with only 3, conference series left. But I guess you don't really know how much that's going to move because, like you mentioned, it's almost like there's not a lot of movement no matter what you do. And then, coming off the series loss at Missouri and, I don't. I mean, because look, you still got A&M on the road. You still got Tennessee, which, even though that's in Starkville, you're not gonna, probably win that series. And I just don't have a good feeling about that one, just because I don't like. Again, you're just looking at it and you're just wondering. They're probably gonna lose 2 of their final 3 series. RPI is at 88 right now, and it's just that's one that we look back on because like we talked about last week, kind of the expectations for Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and to kind of think where both are at this point. Pretty very very interesting because I don't think we would have expected to have that conversation several months ago. So.
No, the one thing about State is like your RPI goes up just by playing Tennessee at this point. And I think
Same
you
with
saw
A&M a little bit,
right.
Yeah.
You saw it with Auburn. I think like I said, Auburn loses to it. They're not in Knoxville, so that helped a little bit more. But Auburn was 10, 11-ish in the RPI, maybe 9, and goes to 3 by losing 2 out of 3. Yeah. So maybe that's where State gets a boost, and you got to do your work against Florida and A&M. So that'll be State's not out yet, but it's getting close. Ole Miss is actually 60 in the RPI. Remaining series, Missouri at LSU, A&M. You got to get at least 6. You get to 13 and 17, maybe you got a shot. Strength of schedule 22. That's probably going to kick up a little bit higher. But oh goodness, Ole Miss has lost 5 series in a row and 6 of 7.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, like, you would think maybe they stop that skid this weekend against Missouri, but I mean, again, for a team like that, it's hard to predict that. I mean, they're 7-14 in the league, and I just don't. They're another one because it's like you play that. I mean, look, they still have that game against Southern Miss too, right? So I mean, that'll help RPI wise, but you got to get wins. Like at this point, like that's what it comes down to. You can play the numbers game all you want, but you gotta get wins. And I mean, look, they didn't play bad against Arkansas, so maybe they can say, they lost 2 or 3, but
they've got a Friday starter all of a sudden.
I mean, so maybe, right? Like, I mean, if you win the Missouri series, like you gotta have it. Like, there's no other way around it. But then it's like you look at those final 2 with LSU and A&M, you're like, obviously the one in Oxford, you feel a little bit better going to LSU, but I don't know. They're a hard one to figure out. But we always say that about these teams that are like the Ole Miss and Mississippi States, where you still have your preseason expectations in your mind, even though we're so far removed from that. But you're still thinking, all right, we kind of know what we thought they could be capable of, and you feel like, all right, anytime, maybe that you can see that. And there probably have been points various times, not a lot this season for Ole Miss that we've seen that, but I think it's still in the back of your mind. But I just look, there's not many games left to be played, so if it's gonna come out and stay out, it's gonna have to be in this stretch right here because there's no other choice. Like you said, they've just got to pick up some wins at this point. So,
well, the one thing if you're Ole Miss that maybe you can, if it gets close, I'm not going to say hang your hat on, but certainly becomes relevant. Kevin Graham missed about a month with an injury. He's probably one of the better hitters in the league, certainly on that team. So that's something that if it gets close, maybe that tilts it a little bit in Ole Miss's favor, but it's a huge long shot at this point. Ole Miss, really the discussion we got to have with them too is, does Ole Miss even make it to Hoover? Because right now you got 3 teams, Ole Miss being one of them at 7-14, Missouri, Kentucky being the others. Boy, Kentucky's the team that you look ahead. You don't really like the slate, hosting Tennessee and Auburn and going to South Carolina. Missouri's got at Ole Miss, Florida at Georgia. And then we talked about Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU at A&M. Kentucky's the one that I think is going to have the hardest time getting to Hoover at this point.
Yeah, like I looked at their schedule. I'm going to pull it back up, but I just don't really see the path. Because again, like we said, I mean, you're just chalking up at least
you're playing maybe 2 national seeds at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say you're chalking up at least 2 losses to Tennessee and Auburn both. So there's 4 losses right there. South Carolina, you're probably, I mean, that's a toss-up basically. So I just don't think there's enough. There's probably just not enough wins in there. I don't think for them to be able to do it. We've seen stranger things happen, but like you said, Tennessee and Auburn are 2 national seeds, and I just don't. You're not going to predict it to happen, like we always say, and so I don't really see it. So
well, and the other problem for Kentucky is the other one at South Carolina, where Carolina's been really good, swept Alabama this weekend. Yeah. I don't think we talked about Alabama. That was not intentional. Alabama now 9-12, but has lost 3 straight series. He's got LSU at Auburn, Arkansas. 53 in the RPI. Again, you go 6-3 and you make the tournament, but I'm not seeing it. The tournament being the NCAA tournament. Actually, if Alabama goes 5-4, I think at 5-4, it's 14-16. You're going to get some quality wins in there between LSU, Auburn, and Arkansas. Then I think Alabama goes, but again, is Alabama capable of pulling that off at this point?
Yeah, it's going to be close, like you said, because it's just dependent on. I mean, that was this is the way to put it. Like, it's just brutal to lose all 3 of those games in South Carolina. It was the Friday night one or the Thursday one. They lose in the bottom of the 9th, and just and I was talking about it's the schedule, how it falls can be so important, and now they undoubtedly play one of the toughest schedules left of anyone, LSU, Auburn, Arkansas. So I mean, they would really have to pick things up to work to basically what they look like probably a month ago, where they had that stretch where they were just playing so well and got the sweep at Ole Miss, and but yeah, they would have.
That seems like forever ago now.
I was gonna say that feels like a long time ago. Got the first win against Tennessee, but doesn't seem that way right now. So they would have to really turn things the other way in these final 3 series. So,
anything we missed here?
Nope. I think, like we said, it's this is officially the stretch run. There's no other way to put it, and so it'll be interesting to see how some of these teams, some that have to make up some ground, some that are in that conversation. Like we said, Tennessee's got locked up. Everybody else still kind of in flux in terms of where they could wind up. But so it will be interesting.
All right, we'll have some other videos coming up this week. We'll do some probably power rankings and player rankings. We'll have those at the site too. So subscribe if you've not done that, and we'll see you again soon.